Okay, so we decided that we want to discuss the problems in like awareness and prevention of abuse in relationships, or like specifically domestic abuse, right? So why don't we start by talking about why we believe that there is like a lack in this awareness or in the prevention of this topic?
I guess I feel like just in certain relationships and stuff, like there's not enough awareness because it's so common. And I found a statistic that says that every year 1 in 3 women who's a victim of abuse is murdered by her current or former partner. And most of the cases beforehand, they're never reported of abuse. So I feel like that's why it's a problem.
Yeah, like people need to start reporting it, and maybe, you know. I also found through a lot of like my reading that one of the biggest issues is that there's just no money at all. Like the media never covers this topic at all. Just like in sports, like sports teams always have things for breast cancer awareness month. Like people, like they wear green or pink cleats and all that kind of stuff. So they definitely have to start doing that for this. Like people never, I didn't even know that domestic violence awareness month. Like, did you?
Yeah, that was also breast cancer.
Yeah, and that's what people focus on. So if there's no money, then there's not going to be any relief, and there's not going to be even money to make things aware to anyone.
Yeah, well, I guess I should say that for solutions, just like trying to make it more like universal, like maybe like, oh, this color is for domestic violence, and just like automatically like recognizing that that's what it is, like. Because
people just need to become like, there's just barely any awareness, like it's not in the spotlight ever.
Yeah, and like all the campaigns and stuff, like I've never heard of any of them, and like other things like I've heard of, like all the breast cancer campaigns and stuff like that.
I never knew that the president gave like a speech every October 1st about domestic violence and stopping it. I had no idea of that at all.
Yeah, me either.
I guess I would say too, I feel like people just don't think it's happening. That's like one of the main reasons. Or even if it's happening to like someone's kids who are in relationships, like oblivious to it, so.
Yeah, everyone's like, oh, it's not my friends, it's not my kids.
Exactly,
like,
so it doesn't, it doesn't matter.
And I think with a lot of people who are like in the situation also, like if it's not like physical abuse, like they might not even know that they're like in like an emotionally like
abusive relationship.
Yeah, like it's very easy to not realize, and just like, because I noticed like you could think like a lot of times when like people are abusing you, you think it's like, oh my god, it's my fault, like I'm the one, like I should change, and like you don't recognize that they're the ones doing it to you.
Yeah, and it's a learned behavior. Like treating someone badly in a situation or like beating someone, you learn to do that. So it's not. And I read here, community denial runs deep when it comes to domestic violence. Like that's what you were saying, like people just don't talk about it. It's just not something that's ever brought up, and that's definitely a problem. Because it affects so many people. Like there's 1.3 million victims of domestic assault every year. That's a huge number. Anyone have anything else?
Do you guys want to start talking about like the advertisements kind of, or like just how like even when it is tried to be like brought aware, there's always just like issues. Like I'm always like, because like in like advertising we talk about PSAs a lot, and like a lot of them, when it comes with like abusive relationships, it's always like people feel like you're either like blaming the woman or like blaming the guy, and then like, because there's certain ones where like most of them in general are like the woman's the victim, or like kind of portraying the woman as like it was her fault, kind of.
Yeah.
And then recently there was like a certain PSA I remember reading about where they actually turned it around and like blaming the man, or like maybe not necessarily the man, but
abuser.
Yeah, the abuser. And then like they got like so much backlash about it being like, oh, like you're like blaming one side and like all this stuff, which is like ridiculous. So like every time I've ever seen like a PSA about it, there's always been so much backlash on it because it's like such a sensitive topic.
Yeah, I don't know if we like want to start talking about solutions, but to address that, you could possibly just get rid of blaming like one person or the other and direct it more at the people around the situation, because I feel like often those are the people that can really help someone. Like like I know if I've had a friend that's not in a good relationship, it's really easy for me to see that versus her. Like she doesn't want to admit it, but if I know like the signs, or it's easier for like that outside source to get involved.
Yeah, I think that's a way to go about it too.
Because it's a different perspective that a lot of people don't take, but it's not placing blame on anyone.
Yeah.
So it won't offend anyone, I guess.
Also, too, probably they might not recognize, like they won't recognize that those are some of the like signals, and they might feel like they have no other alternative.
Especially
so
if
no one ever brings it up, like.
Especially if it's like an emotional
Yeah.
abuse, because a lot of people just think that it's normal everyday talk,
I also found too, it says that there's like not a lot of data about the effectiveness of general awareness, like of the campaigns, but like you were saying before, most people think it's male bashing. So I feel like they either get, like I was looking for this one video on like a Rihanna Chris Brown video on domestic violence that like DoSomething.org promoted, and it was taken down because people thought it was controversial, even though it was like educational.
Because it can go both ways, and I feel like that's another really important thing that needs to be brought across. And I feel like they also always portray heterosexual couples when it can also happen in same-sex relationships.
Yeah.
So I feel like the awareness definitely needs to just be completely like turned around and have different perspectives than, because obviously the way having like the abuser and the victim kind of thing is not working.
Yeah, I think actually, well, going back to the Rihanna Chris Brown thing, I think that's probably a good example we could use too, because like obviously they're like dating now, and like I think like if you're like into like pop culture at all, like he's like a lot of it's put on like Rihanna, like how come she's back with him, like why isn't she doing something about it, like all this stuff, and like I don't feel like there's not as much about like Chris Brown, like him being the one, like
it's like she's the victim.
Yeah. So I think if we wanted to like show like how like, or try and like even it out almost, or like balance it, as opposed to just being like, I think that'd be a good like example instead of just being like this victim and this like abuser. Mm-hmm. Kind of like just as like maybe a possibility of talking like in our videos and stuff.
Yeah. So what are the main like type of criteria that we want to make sure our solutions have? Like what are outcomes of it that we want?
I think it'd be important to get people to talk about it more, like and tell
Definitely.
At least, like, anyone if they feel like they're in this kind of relationship. And I guess like talking to the people outside of the relationship and like focusing the information on them too, because then that would make other people like more likely to be able to talk to them, like if they're going to be more receptive to it.
I also think a big thing is that we need there has to be an involvement with fundraising. So maybe have like one of those public service announcements where you have like an 800 number, or like a number to text to donate such and such, because seriously, without money, like victims can't get medical care, they can't get any of that kind of stuff. Yeah. And that's really like crucial. I read in here something that said that in one community they had 10 animal shelters and they got government funding and state funding and were all doing fine, and then they had one domestic violence center that had no funding and they were struggling to even keep it together. Like that's sad.
Yeah, going off of that, I found like their abuse shelters that they have, it just asks like what goes on inside these facilities, and if they don't have money, like even being in that shelter could trigger new incidences of abuse too. So like I also agree that like funds are a real problem.
Yeah.
And it also says like if a male happens to show up at a domestic violence shelter, they may try to help him, but are unlikely to have an active outreach program and services like set up for their needs. Yeah, like just in general.
Yeah, I feel like the public fundraising events can also help raise the awareness of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely agree.
Yeah. And I feel like it definitely has to approach more than one side and include things that people don't normally talk about. Like we were talking about how it can be males and females, and it can be different types of relationships. And it doesn't even have to be physical violence. It could be emotional violence. It could be, psychological damage that last for a really long time for these people. Anything else?
You just focus on like the relationship as a whole instead of like the individuals in it, and just like this is a bad relationship. Like, I don't know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I feel like that's why, like I was reading somewhere that there's a myth that like if you have a bad relationship, that's the reason for you having this abuse. When in reality, you have abuse because someone reacts like that in certain situations. So maybe even taking that approach and making people understand that even if you fix your relationship that you think is bad, that doesn't mean that the abuse is going to stop. So maybe women will start to try to like get out of the relationship and instead of focusing on fixing it. So I feel like that's a big thing too. Like people just think, okay, I can fix it, so I'll stick around for 6 more months, and then it's just 6 more months of abuse and nothing changes.
Like, what do you guys think though are like more practical solutions just to help increase awareness? Besides like fundraising and stuff, I don't, what I found was just like a lot on starting in schools like at a really young age for prevention, like even anti-bullying stuff, just because it helps like embed these values in them early on, and like not just, okay, we're gonna have one class on like anti-violence or whatever. There was this one study that showed it was like a school-wide effort, and they had a play actually that was like breaking this silence or whatever, and it was acting it out. So it helped the students like understand some of the concepts a little further, which I think would be good.
And that way, was that like younger?
It was like younger kids, but I feel like
Because
instead of just having one class, like I feel like that's what's important, is that their whole school is like on board with some kind of like attitude.
It's definitely crucial to act early though, because that's when kids are gonna like learn those behaviors. Like when I'm stressed, I'm gonna punch something, I'm gonna punch somebody.